Hey everybody, and welcome to another new episode of Time Extend. As always, my name is Adam Ismail. I'm one of your hosts, and I am joined today with...
Brendan Norrison, and today we have a treat for you. It won't just be one topic we're looking at, but two. Starting with the brand new port of Virtua Racing by M2. Don't know about you, Adam, but I've been excited about this discussion for a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. So, Virtua Racing came out in Japan about the time we're doing this podcast 2 weeks ago, and still hasn't come out in the rest of the world yet, but we were just so excited for M2's rendition of Virtua Racing on the Switch that we had to go grab it from the Japanese eShop, so we've done that, and a lot of people have done that, actually, I've seen online, and we're really happy to talk about it. But that's not all we're talking about, right?
No, exactly. Since it's been a while since we've done a traditional podcast, we thought we'd treat everyone as well to the continuation of our Unreleased Racers section, so we're excited to get into that as well.
Yeah, so we've had a couple really amazing podcasts and really amazing guests over the last however many episodes, from Paul last episode to Jordan and Andrew, and it has been a while since we've just kind of done just like a chill, just relaxed show.
It's not quite free practice, but it's the same kind of vibe, just us chilling and talking and trying to be as interesting as those guests we've had on recently.
Yeah, it'll be tough to do though, because they were awesome. But yeah, I think Virtual Racing is a good place to start. So we'll just get into that. And you know, Virtual Racing is on the Switch. M2 did an amazing job, like we expected them to. You can go to the Japanese eShop and download this game if you live outside Japan, which I imagine you probably do if you're listening to this podcast. And it's like I can get my credit card to work, so I just ended up buying a card off of Play Asia and using that, and that was really easy. As long as you're paying, as long as you're okay with paying like that Play Asia tax, which like isn't really that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the best port of the Virtual Racing. I think it's safe to say that we have now. Digital Foundry just did an amazing series, a video on it, like a half-hour-long video comparing this to all the other versions. And if there's any doubt in your mind, like, no, it's the real deal. It's the best port. M2 did great work. They always do. And now I'm just sucked into just trying to get the fastest times and trying to beat you, Bren. But I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon.
That's pretty much because I've been no-lifing Bay Bridge, though, to be fair. Like, the flow of that track, and I'm sure it's something we'll talk about later on, like, I absolutely love driving that track out of the three that are included. Yeah, to dial back about general feelings about the game, I am stunned by how much I'm actually enjoying it, because I've always kind of maybe dabbled in Virtua Racing. I've never been a huge fan so much as I've played it a lot, because when I was growing up it was more the kind of the next model, essentially. So you're looking at Daytona and Sega Rally, like that was my kind of games growing up. So it almost feels like to quote that Sonic movie trailer, the genesis of arcade racing games is where you're seeing the kind of the formative stages of what would become Daytona and Sega Rally, but it doesn't mean for a second it's any less addictive, because, oh man, M2 have nailed the handling engine here. The car just has that amount of give that Sega racers are known for whenever you're going round corners and stuff, that just makes it so addicting to shave off those milliseconds.
I was wondering how you were going to get on with Virtual Racing, because it was new for you, and you're obviously like huge fan of Sega Rally and other Sega racers, but VR is the first. And I don't know, I guess because for me, I always felt like it was the one that was like more rough around the edges. It was their first try. I didn't really enjoy the game until playing it with this release, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and I think that from somebody who, like you said, wasn't big on it in the first place, it's got to be that shift to 60 frames per second and the slight tweaks they've made, because when I was watching Digital Foundry's fantastic video on it, like, the other games looked great, especially the PS2 one visually, but the kind of the 30 frames or even 15 frames per second versions, like, I imagine they're playable, but I don't think they'd be anywhere near as enjoyable or smooth as this Switch release.
Yeah, I've actually played all those versions, except for the one version that got ported to a Sharp mobile phone in Japan. which I didn't even know was a thing. And I've had a weird relationship with Virtua Racing over the years, because I think, I've played those versions. A lot of them were pretty poor approximations of the arcade game that kind of just left me with a bad taste in my mouth, so I didn't really know how good this game could be. And it was a combination of that, and I think I'll want to talk about the other versions a little bit later in this discussion, but I had this crazy epiphany when I was playing this game, where I realized, like, I have no idea, or over the years have had zero idea how to play Virtua Racing, and I was doing it all wrong. And the only way I was able to find this out was by watching some of the, the top times, the fastest times in the world, which luckily enough you can do in this game. You look at the leaderboard, and every single time on the leaderboard has a replay attached to it that's also uploaded, which is amazing. And just watching other people with their runs, it just kind of like opened my eyes to like, no, this is the way you're supposed to use a handling model in the game to your advantage. I was doing it all wrong. I was playing it, I was on the gas and brake all the time, like I was playing any other racing game. But Virtua Racing is very old, and it's very different, and it doesn't even, it's not even anything like Sega Rally or Daytona. It's totally its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. When I first started playing it, I was able to put in decent times, but I did feel as if something was up. And then after seeing some replays myself, I realised it's because, like you're saying, we've almost become hard-coded to even expect arcade racers now to have some degree of realism when it comes to the gas and the brake. But in reality, this is the type of game where it's all about going on that throttle, coming off that throttle, coming on that throttle, and kind of managing the handling, as opposed to kind of keen braking and that type of thing. And once you get in the flow, it's incredible. Because when I started playing at first, not understanding the handling model, I was really curious how in Bay Bridge, how the hell are you supposed to tackle those like consecutive S-bends into hairpins?
Oh, yeah.
Because I was losing so much speed and I knew something was wrong. But then when it clicks and you know exactly how you're supposed to drive the car, oh my god, that feels incredible. Like, that's, I would go as far to say Bay Bridge is probably one of my favourite tracks in the old Sega Racers, like arcade wise, because it's such a fun track to drive. I really enjoy it.
That's really high praise. Yet for me, it was realizing that I was supposed to use the brake as just try to avoid the brake as much as possible in this game. It's all throttle control. It's all about your line, and not just the brake, but also the steering inputs. I was using normal mode for a while, and normal, like in retrospect, now that I know how to play the game, the fact that they included a different mode bothers me a little bit, only because like I think normal makes it easier to play the game if you're not accustomed to playing it properly like I was, or like many people I'm sure are. But it doesn't, it's not the best way to play if you want to go fast. I feel like it's probably impossible, because essentially what normal does is your 30-40% input steering in arcade, which would get you a slight degree of lateral movement. In normal, it just goes full lock. Like, you completely lose that like middle ground where turning the wheel a little bit gives you a little bit of a result. In normal, it just, I feel like it accelerates your inputs just so that people can get going left or right very quickly, which isn't the way you want to play, because you actually in Virtua Racing, I feel like, have the most amount of grip when you're about 60 to 70% of full lock. Anything past that, and you just start skidding into a drift where you're not cutting the corner any more tightly, you're just kind of fading off into nowhere's land. Yeah,
definitely, and it's learning that kind of biting point almost between what you can get the car to do and what it's not capable of doing, because even now, I've put a few hours into the game, but I still feel as if sometimes when I'm trying to learn how much the car can drift, because you're so eager to shave off those last few seconds, it's so easy to push it a little bit too far and end up spinning out.
Yeah, especially Bay Bridge, that corner, after all the S's, where you kind of take that little off ramp and it's the right-hander. that corner that's like that almost like a 90-degree right-hander. That corner is so difficult, especially because if you don't get the correct line, you just bite the grass a little bit on the exit in the median, and if you do that, like, I spin every single time.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of brings me on to another mechanic of the game, you could say, where when you do kind of slightly tap the grass, your car can lose speed. So that can almost act as a replacement for braking. So if you can hit the right points of each turn, whenever you do need to slow down, you can effectively get the game to do it for you if you kind of guide the car in the right direction. And it's that type of ingenuity that Sega arcade racers were known for. Like, it's the same in Sega Rally almost, where there's so many corners in that game where you can avoid braking by getting the rear of the car to hit the wall at the exact right angle, and then that your car just bounces perfectly off of it and you maintain your speed. And that was one of the things, like, when I was playing Sega Rally 95 way back, that I learned to perfect almost, because you can eliminate a lot of the requirement for braking. And when you when you combo that with using the Stratos, you can set like ridiculous times. So like, I think in Virtua Racing you can definitely see maybe an almost slightly primitive version of that, but it definitely keeps it interesting. It's not a case of there's only 3 tracks here and once you play them you say, well, that was a nice trip down memory lane, which a lot of people could argue some of these ages releases are. Like, I've also picked up Gain Ground recently, which I personally think is a great little game, almost to kind of set the seeds for like Diablo. But the thing is, it's very primitive, because at the time it seemed obviously a bit complex, but nowadays there's games similar that do it a lot better. But Virtua Racing has that required element for Sega arcade racers where it's like, oh, I've got to shave that time off.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like, once I was more careful with my steering and very sparing with my braking, instantly I was 2 seconds faster a lap. Instantly. Like, once I started going through Bay Bridge and realized, like, oh, I can take the first corner flat out if I turn the car like this, and once I started realizing that the only corner I really have to brake on at that track, if I need to, is the last one, that changed everything. I mean, I was so much faster, and it felt so good, and I think I've probably hit a wall now in terms of how fast I could go.
Yeah.
But it's still, it's still fun to play. Do you have a Pro Controller by chance?
I do indeed, yeah, but I've actually this is actually a bit of a confession. I've only played the game in handheld so far. Like, all of my time so far has been spent kind of playing it on handheld mode, so I've not even seen its beauty on TV yet.
well, here's what I'll say. I usually don't play my Switch docked, but with this game, I felt like I wanted to, because I wanted to see Virtua Racing in in HD 60 frames on the big screen. And
Of
it
course,
looks great.
yeah.
But if you have gone as fast as you've gone just by playing in handheld mode with the Joy-Con stick, oh my god! If you use your Pro Controller, you'll be faster. I have zero doubt.
Really?
Oh yeah, because the Joy-Cons, like, I don't know about you, but like, and they're good analog sticks, they're fine, but they're very small. The buttons are very small. The sticks are small. Like, I don't know. I find it way easier to be comfortable playing a game with the Pro Controller.
I mean, that sets up an interesting point, actually, because would you believe so far I play with the D-pad primarily when I play this game?
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, so I'm proper bringing it back.
Wow.
It just feels like, I don't know, a lot of those, like, not that era of racing games, but like maybe that decade, you could say, I just always felt as if the digital inputs are a bit more exact, because the way arcade racing games work, like,
yeah.
the analog stick is a necessity for games that are emulating how a real car would act, but I just I find it easier to work out the kind of car behaviour from using the D-pad, and maybe that comes from playing way too much Wipeout back in the day or whatever, but like, I just enjoy using the D-pad. Have you used the D-pad at all for the game, or has it pretty much been just the analog stick?
I have not used the D-pad at all. Well, I mean, the way I see it is, like, a lot of old racing games obviously use the D-pad because that's all that was available, but I feel like coming from the arcade, steering wheel handling usually translates pretty decently to analog sticks, I find, except in like the weirdest scenarios. Like, if I tried to emulate Le Mans 24 once on the Model 3 board, and that game is abysmal to play with a controller. But yeah, anytime I played Daytona 2 or Scud Race or something like that on my computer, I find that the analog control works pretty well. So yeah, but I'll give that a shot though. I mean, that also makes it even more amazing to me that you're getting these times, because like the Switch D-pad is not really a D-pad.
It's not a D-pad. It's just 4 buttons.
Yeah.
That's interesting then. So I might actually try with the analog stick, because I imagine all the Japanese speed aliens have knocked my time down quite a few chunks, but I was pushing that top 20 spot at one point.
Ah, fantastic.
So yeah, I'll be sure to try that out then. But the thing is, just as a kind of sidebar almost, what you've just said about how the controller translates to arcade boards in terms of like handling for games like Scud Race and that type of thing, it raises an interesting point about why these ports are important, because I too emulate like Sega Rally and stuff on my PC, and while they're good and playable, you just know in the back of your head like there's a slight difference to the way the car handles, because it wasn't obviously built for using a controller.
Yeah.
So that's why we should really be happy when M2 are creating ports of these types of games, because we know the wizardry they can do with the Mega Drive and Genesis stuff. Like they've got a great portfolio of that now. But seeing Virtua Racing gives me hope that, I mean, Daytona, surely, easily enough, there's not many licenses to navigate there. Sega Rally, maybe a potential. I mean, it's not many licenses. I think we've discussed that before. So, like, there's definitely scope for them to spread their wings a bit and get involved in these games. And while they might not include as many Easter eggs as some of the Genesis and Mega Drive stuff, there's still room for that M2 flair and maybe some original songs. Of which, in Virtua Racing, there's a nice remix.
It has a remix of the replay song from Virtua Racing Deluxe, which was a 32X game, and it's so good. I mean, in the classical M2 style, what they've done is they have redone the song with the tools that would have been available to them at the time if they had made the game on Model 1. So that song is already a good one on the 32X, but it's amazing the way they've done it for Model 1. Which is also a critical point that brings us to something I've been thinking about as I've been playing Virtual Racing a lot lately, which is that I think, I don't think Virtual Racing is anyone's favorite Sega racer. I think that's pretty fair to say, but I think what actually hurts it more than we realize is the fact that this game does not have a real soundtrack.
Yeah.
Which every time I come back to it, I'm amazed. Like, it's so weird. It's like such a foreign point to me in like the history of game design. We have this game that plays little jingles when you cross a checkpoint, and that's pretty much it.
It's certainly different to what we're used to from Sega Arcade Racers, and it almost feels as if they're in there just to say like there is some form of soundtrack, because some of them have like a really nice beat and you're like, oh, I quite like this, then by the time you finish saying that, it's stopped because the jingles are so short. And even the general sound design of the game, it has this like almost vaporwave like feel where it's like all these kind of low quality like game over sounds and stuff, but I love it to bits, just purely because I think I said this made a discussion kind of off the podcast. It feels like the kind of formative stages of what Sega Racers would have in terms of atmosphere later down the line. But it isn't
absolutely.
Quite there yet.
It's got the whole.
When this game came out.
It's got the whole blue skies thing going.
Yeah.
Pretty strong. That's sort of the genesis of this, and to crib another terrible phrase from that Sonic trailer, but yeah, it's the music is so interesting because there are moments where I just want to hear this continue. Like when you cross the start finish line on your last lap, when you're starting the last lap, there's a great tune that plays, and ever since the first time I heard it when I got the Sega Saturn version of the game, which I got like, this wasn't when it was out, this was when I was much older, I was a teenager. I've heard some of these songs for a long time, and I was so amazed when I played the Sega Saturn one for the first time, and I'm like, wait, that's it? Like, it just ends? Like, you're not used to that in games today, you know? It's like a totally foreign experience. But I commend obviously M2 for making that replay track, and Virtua Racing is a very weird game, but it's a very important one too.
One of the things I love is like when you finish first, and you get that little like the podium cutscene, and when the guy throws his hat, it's just like complete silence basically, and the hat just kind of flies in this unnatural motion and lands on the ground, and it just has this like certain style to it that for some reason I really enjoy, but I'm not sure why. It's just so Sega.
There's nothing more I love than this like quintessential Sega from this era doing something incredibly technologically advanced that just ages horribly. Like back at the time, seeing these like drivers celebrate and throw the hat, and then you hear the clip of audio when the race ends and you game on. It's like it's all terrible today, but at the time it was like, oh my god, that's a 3D polygon model of someone. And like, I mean, their eyes look horrific.
Oh, it's awful.
They're rhombuses sitting in faces, and like, you should go, definitely, if you haven't, you're listening to this, go watch a Digital Foundry video, because they explain just the fact that this game was coded and designed in a completely unnatural, freakish way that would not happen anymore with a 3D polygonal game, and that's why you have all of these graphical glitches, because there are a lot of them. Like, and M2 left them all in the game because they're M2 and they're sticklers for accuracy. But that's why the game is messy. I mean, only watching that video did I realize how I could watch the replay and get to see Vert McPolygon. Did you see this?
I didn't actually know.
No, so Vert McPolygon is the commentator of Virtua Racing that only appears if you watch a replay of a Grand Prix race, so it has to be the 20-lap one.
Right.
And he appears in a little box in the corner of the screen, and it's just this guy like waving his arms, not saying anything, but there's like subtitles that come up underneath him, and it's these horribly like mistranslated phrases like, you know, so exciting, race to watch, or something like that. And he just has like, he only has like 5 coded canned phrases in there, but it's just so silly and so early 90s Sega.
So have you done a 20 laps race yourself yet, Adam? Because I haven't actually tried it myself, and I'm wondering if like the computer kind of scales up in difficulty to match that. Have you gave it a go?
Yeah, I have a couple times. I have not found any difference in the difficulty, actually. I'm able to get to the front of the pack as quickly as I would in any other mode. The challenge I've found is that you have tire wear that's introduced, and I would say around like 6 or 7 laps in is the cutoff point, is the break point for the tires for me, where I start to feel like I'm really, really losing grip. And I mean, you'll lose 2 seconds a lap if you have worn tires. The problem is, though, that the beginner track, Big Forest and Acropolis, those 2 tracks have pit lanes, but Bay Bridge does not have a pit lane. So
yeah, it doesn't.
You can't fix your tires in Bay Bridge. But then also, like, I'm not sure if it's like faster, honestly, to pit, because you lose so much time in the pits in that game, and there's such a gap between you and the leader.
I'll need to give that a go myself and see how it is. I've just been too focused on that leaderboard hunting on the kind of regular tracks, because obviously that's where the game shines the most. But it's good that M2 have added some additional extras, because I think this is something in the Sega Ages series, it's expected that they kind of add some nice features, like new features and stuff, but Virtua Racing kind of, it doesn't really have much, does it, in terms of new content or anything, and maybe that brings you on to the point about the 32X version as well.
Yeah, so I never really enjoyed, as I was saying before, any of the previous versions of this game that I've played. The Mega Drive Genesis one is a technical achievement, but no one should ever play that game. Like, I'm just gonna come out there and say, and like, it kind of hurts me a little bit when I read like, or when I watch a Digital Foundry video, or I read people's like comments and opinions, and like people are actually recommending the Mega Drive one above the Saturn one. That game is unplayable. Like, yeah, they couldn't do anything better at the time. I'm fully aware of this, but that doesn't make it good. That doesn't make it something you could play. Like, I recently reviewed the Mega SG, the new analog system, and
Jealous.
I have a copy of Virtua Racing. Sorry, not Deluxe. Virtua Racing on the Mega Drive with the SVP chip.
Yeah.
And I played it, and oh my god, it just gives you a headache. And like you can't. It's like 10 frames a second. You can't see anything. The way they achieve, like, because the color depth is so minimal that, like, the way they achieve lighter colors is through, like, checkerboard patterns, which, but they're, like, huge checkerboard patterns. They're, like, really big, so it just really hurts your eyes. I can't play that game. The 32X one is better, and the 32X one plays well enough, but it's on the 32X. Like, is anyone really going to go play that game? Like, I had 32X once I bought at, like, a flea market, not a flea market, like a retro game store or whatever, in a flea market. And it was broken from the moment I got it. Like, I don't want to have to screw with the 32X at all if I don't have to. I mean, it's a decent port. Like, it's probably the best game on the 32X, and like they add a lot of content. There are a lot of extra tracks and a lot of, maybe not a lot, but a couple extra cars. And the music's better, obviously, because it's got that replay song and a couple others. Yeah, my initial experience was with the Saturn version, which a lot of people don't like, but I think is okay. You know, I think it's fine. It's not like, it wasn't even developed by Sega. It was like it's like this weird thing where it says Time Warner Interactive's Virtua Racing on the cover.
I've seen that.
Yeah, it's very strange. I don't really know why Sega didn't just port Virtua Racing to the Saturn, like everyone probably expected them to. I mean, I'm sure they were working on Daytona and Sega Rally, but so maybe they just like decided to give it to Time Warner or whatever, because nobody cared about Virtua Racing in like 1995 or whenever the Saturn was coming out. But yeah, it's a weird port. The loading times are horrendous. The handling's a little bit off. But, like, at least it runs at 30 frames per second. Like, that's my feeling. It's, like, the handling's not right, but, like, this game works at the speed that my brain does. Yeah. So I can kind of deal with that. And I don't know. I don't know if you've played any of the previous ones, or PS2 one's all right. That one's a little weird, too. But.
The PS2 one's the one I've played. That was the version I picked up. And this is maybe a bit of a slightly controversial point, but I feel as if graphically the PS2 one in some elements seems better than the Switch one for me, particularly in the kind of colour saturation area. I feel as if the Switch version of this game, it seems to have a very kind of light hue to every colour, and it doesn't make it look bad at all. It just makes it look a bit different, and I'm wondering if that was intentional by M2 or not, because I seen Digital Foundry also brought up that point.
Yeah, I have this weird, well, it's not really much of a theory, it's just something I've noticed a lot over the years. Anytime I've seen Daytona emulated on, like, a PC, it looks really washed out. But when I see home console versions of the game, it doesn't look washed out at all. And, like, I think when Sega ported it, the color depth was, like, correct. I'm getting a similar feeling with Virtua Racing. I wonder if, like, this game played on like a CRT modder or something like that, or whatever primitive modder they had at the time, just looked a certain way, and like, but it never was really designed to look that, like, or maybe like the game was made with the limitations of CRT in mind, so they made it lighter or something like that, so it would display dark, because if they had made it darker like the way we think of the game when they built it that way, it would look too dark on the CRT. But when you play it on the LCD screen, you get exactly what the designers were making at that time, without the, you know, basically what they built in so that the game wouldn't look too dark on an old modder. So I mean, that's the way I imagine it, because I don't think M2 would have made any sort of change unless they absolutely had to. And like the Saturn one looks a lot darker, for example. And the PS2 one does as well, but the PS2 one takes so many liberties with the graphics. It adds so much in
it does.
That you really forget how much it adds in. Like, I completely forgot about like the reflections and the shadows and how the wheels are a little bit more rounded and all of that stuff. It's an impressive port, but like a weird one, because all of the changes that they make don't really necessarily gel with like the whole concept of Virtua Racing. Like, you have these like realistic reflections and backgrounds, but you're still racing in the flat, like, you know, flat shaded polygon world. It's very strange.
I think the this game has also put me in the mood for a lot more racers in this style as well. Like, when you think about that PS2 version, that kind of reminds me of maybe something that could be done nowadays, like a kind of, not a homage quite, but just a racing game style like Virtua Racing, down to that flat polygon texture look, because I love it, man. I think it's really held up well because it looks so crisp on the Switch as well.
Oh, it ages tremendously well. That's the beauty of the whole flat shaded thing, is that a lot of what gets old 3D games down are the textures, and once you get rid of those textures, like, what you have is essentially timeless, you know? I mean, it's kind of like what people say about Jet Set Radio, like, just anything that's like flat or cell shaded, where you're just working with colors, just like blocks of colors, I feel like upscales very, very well.
Yeah, without a doubt, Virtua Racing's a testament to that.
Yeah. So we should probably move on to the next topic. I don't know if you know, we're a half hour in. I don't know if you had any final thoughts you wanted to get through, but that basically sums it up for me. You know, another amazing job pouring this, and if you want to go pick it up, we highly recommend it. It's all in English, so you don't have to worry about that. Because as I was buying the game, I was very concerned. I was like, will I even be able to read anything on the screen? Like, not so much the arcade game, but like all the Sega Ages menus, because they add a lot to the game, and I want to understand what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Getting the Japanese one was a no-brainer for me once I realised it was in English. And yeah, just in terms of final thoughts, it's another great port by M2. I'm so happy to have a Sega arcade racing game on the Switch. It's whetted my appetite for what could come next. And if this is the type of stuff we want to see from the Ages collection, it comes down to that age-old cliche, you've got to buy it. So hopefully, if Virtua Racing does well, that'll open the door to some of the Model 2 stuff and what comes next for the kind of Sega arcade cabinet. And also, I seen an article, it was like the kind of the person that was the head of porting this game, I believe, was saying that if this port sells well enough, they would even consider some sort of like semi-sequel to Virtua Racing. Now, it's probably just a tongue-in-cheek comment, but it's an interesting one nonetheless, because I don't think it would actually take that much resources to create like a sequel just like in the exact same vein as the original.
I mean, I really wonder how it would go making new content for this old game, essentially, and then having it work in the Switch environment.
Yeah.
I have to say, like, that'd be cool, but I would be pretty upset if they decided to make Virtua Racing 2 instead of porting Sega Rally or Daytona. I would be pretty upset with that, because I don't really think you can. I mean, frankly, like, Daytona is Sega's, you know, highest grossing arcade game, one of the highest grossing arcade games in the history of the world. Like, that game belongs on Sega Ages. You know, Sega Rally, like, we love Sega Rally, but I just feel like Daytona is so obvious as like a next step if they want to do a polygonal game. I think what'll happen is I'll probably do Virtua Fighter 1, because that was a Model 1 game, and then after that, maybe we'll see them move on to Model 2. I mean, if they ported Virtua Fighter 2 to the Switch, it would make a lot of people happy. So I'm excited that M2 has moved on to polygons, because I mean, that's what we grew up with, and that's where my nostalgia lies. As much as I enjoyed Sega Ages Outrun, it's a little bit before my time, so yeah, my enjoyment of that game is kind of limited for that reason.
I think, as I said earlier, Daytona has got to be pretty much a certainty. They've already ported it multiple times. That there isn't much kind of outside of gameplay kinks to work out in terms of licensing and that type of thing. Sega Rally, it's one of these ones, I'll believe it when I see it, because I just, even though it is only a Lancia and a Toyota license, I've just got a bad feeling about it reappearing, because it has been quite some time.
They were able to re-release that game in 2006, so
yeah.
I think it's possible. I think, and everyone's like, oh, Toyota doesn't license their cars anymore. I think Toyota will make an exception for this one. This isn't like, first of all, it's a race car, because like a lot of the issue is that they've been fine with bringing their race cars to games. It's their road cars that they have a hard time with.
That's true.
As a great article went up on GT Planet not too long ago, it's possible they have an exclusivity agreement with Polyphony Digital. It's also possible they like working with Polyphony Digital because they have forever, and they're a Japanese company and they understand each other well. And honestly, I think what Polyphony's trying to do with Gran Turismo is more of like a marketing thing than any of the air companies, because they have the whole, or any of the air developers rather, because they have the whole brand central thing, and they very much try and give you the brand experience in the game. So anyway, all I'm trying to say is I think there are reasons why it could work out, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I hope you're right, and to be slightly controversial, I wouldn't even mind an outrun type approach where they replace the licensed cars with slightly tweaked generics.
I can't. No, that would lose it for me, because like part of Sega Rally is those licenses. Yeah. Like I probably would not care about real cars growing up. I wouldn't have become like a petrol head or a car enthusiast or whatever the hell you want to call it if I didn't see those two logos as the game started. And
oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Just if that's what it takes to get a Sega Rally port, if it ever came down to that, whatever it takes, get it done.
Yeah.
That'd be my opinion. I mean, like you said, I think the likelihood is if they were going to do a port, they would get those licenses. That's pretty much a certainty. But if for some weird freak reason that's what it came down to have Sega Rally 95 on the Switch, I would take that hit purely because, I mean, it's Sega Rally 95. It's been so long since we've seen a port of that in 2006, like you're saying. It's a long time ago now.
As long as they're pouring that one and not Sega Rally Revo, I'm okay with that, Brendan.
Wow. I feel attacked.
The shade. So, we're gonna move on now to unreleased racing games. Of course, we end up spending 40 minutes on Virtua Racing. I was really hoping we could keep it to half that, but so one of the earliest episodes we've done of Time Extend was about unreleased racing games, and this is a continuation of that discussion because there were a couple games I want to talk about that we didn't really get through, and that episode it goes through a lot. We're going to cover less today. I think I explained this last time we had this discussion, but like, there's not a lot of information on a lot of these games, and you kind of hit a wall. Like, the first one that we'll talk about is the 2003 Fast and the Furious game that Genki was working on. Genki being the developer that makes Tokyo Extreme Racers, I'm sure a lot of people know. And I tried to find information on this game. Like, it was previewed by IGN. Like, so there's actual stories about it and there's videos about it, but like, it's very hard to figure out what went wrong, which is kind of amazing to me because like, it's Fast and the Furious. You know, it's one of the biggest film franchises in the world. I mean, I guess maybe in the early 2000s it wasn't quite as big as it is now, but like,
yeah,
it's like a Universal product. You know, Universal Studios and whatever. It's just weird how little information exists. But this particular game, I don't know if you've seen anything on it, Brendan. It looks very strange because at least in all the videos I can find, it just looks extremely unfinished.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've seen the videos about it, and man, they're not even hiding the fact that Tokyo Extreme Racer was probably the back end of this, because like the menus and stuff where it's showing the cars off, it just looks as if it's ripped directly from Zero.
I guess what they tried to do is just make a real open world game with the Tokyo Extreme Racer engine, which Tokyo Extreme Racer is like, it's almost like we were talking about with relation to Ridge Racer 5, in that it's this kind of fake open world where like yeah, you can drive anywhere, but it's also like in this like bigger environment, but it's actually very linear and limited. And I mean, in Tokyo Extreme Racer, like I guess you can choose the route you want to go down, but you can't turn around and you can't change direction on the highway because there's always a divider in between you and the other side. So it's like a very like rudimentary way of doing an open world. And if you look at these videos, like they're developing their own traffic system, like they're trying to make essentially like Midnight Club. And it's like I don't know if Genki has the resources to make Midnight Club in the early 2000s. It doesn't seem like something that they would really be good at. I mean, reading the IGN's preview, they were basically trying to just make LA in this game. And in the video, I think you see them driving around. What was it? Was it the Dodge Charger or was it the Supra?
That's it, the Dodge Charger and the Supra. You kind of get glimpses of both.
Yeah, and there's just pop-up all over the place, and it doesn't look good, but which is a shame because like you would think, who else do you want making a Fast and the Furious game but the developer of Tokyo Extreme Racer? I mean,
exactly.
The studio. I'm sure that Genki doesn't. They probably wouldn't do the story justice, but the gameplay would probably be great, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the biggest problems, especially in this time period for street racing games, was like at daytime, it just looks like a barren wasteland. And that isn't a fault on the developers, that's just a time period, because it's one of the reasons why EA were very smart for the first Underground games, like explicitly making it nighttime only. Hell, even Genki did it themselves for Tokyo Extreme Racer. And a lot of the promotional materials are shown off at daytime, which makes it look even worse.
You can get away with a lot at night.
Yeah.
Like, I remember the first time I played TXR2 on the Dreamcast, I was like, this is the most beautiful game I've ever seen. And now I look back on it, and I was like, why is this so good? Now I look back on it, it's like, oh, it's very simple. It's basically 50% of the rendering power has gone into your car.
Yeah.
And you are in a box with three sides and very, essentially it's a road and two very high walls and you can't see the ground. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Like that's how they can get away with it. And it works very well for TXR. But yeah, you have a sense maybe they did not anticipate the challenges of doing this, off the bat and decided to take on this project. Cause Genki was always kind of a smaller studio. They always made very quirky kind of weird games. I wouldn't say they really pushed the envelope in terms of, innovation and game design or technical achievement, but their stuff was always very fun to play.
Yeah, exactly.
That's true.
One of the good examples of that is Genki brought out like a Tokyo Extreme Racer game basically on PSP. It wasn't called as such.
Oh, Street Supremacy, yeah.
That's it, yeah, Street Supremacy. And like I remember distinctly playing it and really enjoying it because I enjoyed the Tokyo Extreme Racer series. But if you were to check out reviews and stuff, like you're talking like 5.5s out of 10 and stuff because, like you're saying, they weren't exactly known for innovation. They just had this particular kind of gameplay loop that really did like appeal to a lot of people, but not everyone. And maybe this was a chance to jump outside of that because it does, even from the kind of sketchy footage that was released, there's definitely ambition there, and the fact it was linked to the Fast and the Furious at the time would have been interesting for a lot of people purely because there was still that kind of coolness element to street racing. And yeah, it's a bit of a shame that it never got released.
Can you imagine though? The one reason I'm okay with this game not seeing the light of day is, can you imagine like the FMV sequences that would play in between races and just how awful they would be? Because like I'm sorry, but I think Genki is they stay in their lane. They make racing games. Like that's all they do. I don't think they know how to make a thing with the story. And that's not just like I'm not trying to be up on them. Like fucking EA doesn't know how to do it. Nobody knows how to do it. It's a very hard thing to do. So like I have to imagine that with like probably the heavy Japanese translation issues to Japanese to English that would arise, like it probably would not have been a great overall experience. But nevertheless, I would have liked to see what an open world Genki game looked like, I guess.
The funny thing about those Japanese translation errors you're talking about is even in the preview trailer, there's some of that. It's like clips from Fast and Furious, and it just says, "Do you want it? How much do you want it?" and stuff. And it's like, what the hell is going on here?
Oh my god! What is this racing game trying to suggest to me? Jesus.
Oh, it's amazing. And it's funny you mentioned like FMV and stuff, because in a kind of forum that was discussing the game, I noticed that somebody commented saying that in 2004 there was a Fast and Furious arcade racing game made by Raw Thrills.
Oh god,
and,
Raw Thrills.
Yeah, we know what to expect from those guys.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's good that they got the license, because I think those games are very successful. So, I mean, that's fine. Raw Thrills is like the continuation of like Cruisin' USA era Midway. It's not like, I think some of those people still work at the company, and it's a brand of arcade racing that never got on with me. So
I was gonna say Raw Thrills are like the junkiest of junk food when it comes to arcade racing games. There's absolutely no what's the word, intricacy.
There's no nuance. I mean, yeah. Look, I kind of feel like an asshole, and I feel like the way that the world works in 10 years, there's going to be, well, I mean, there's not enough people in this genre who give a crap to have opinions like this, but we're all going to look back and be like, oh, we really underappreciated Raw Thrills. Like,
no.
There was actually like a subtlety to what they were doing, and like we got it all wrong. It's like how like terrible movies, like The Room ends up being like analyzed at like, a scholarly film level. Like, I feel like that's what we're going to do for Raw Thrills.
It's the racing version of like mobile games, not good mobile games. It's just that kind of, I mean, some of the fucking cabinets don't even have a brake button. A brake pedal, sorry. Like,
yeah, that's
your
hilarious.
toy's just an accelerator and a wheel, and oh man, it just like, it's one of those types of arcade machines where you don't even feel as if you're actually impacting anything. Like, it just feels as if it's on rails the whole time. And yeah, I think that was as arcade enthusiasts, I think we'd agree that that's maybe where things started to go a bit crap, when the kind of racing games were reduced to that level of basicness. But I mean, that's a discussion for another time. Like you said, maybe Raw Thrills are actually underappreciated, and it'll take us a decade to realise it.
Yeah, I feel like we need to do an episode. It's like the death of arcade racing. Maybe that'll be like
fantastic.
maybe that'll be like the end, like the last episode of Time Extend we ever do, to symbolize our own death.
That is so apt.
Yeah. So I think it just about covers it for Fast and Furious. We'll never know what that would have been, but as we won't with any of these games. Next up is a game that we touched on the last episode. If you listen to our chat with Paul Ryszczynski, we were talking about this game called Urban Smash, which was developed in between, not developed, but like they were working on it sort of in between Pacific Rift and Motorstorm Apocalypse, and that was confirmed on the show we had. I think that was the theory going into it, and talking to him, he said, he couldn't reveal a lot of details about the game, probably because I'm sure with Sony and everything, there's only so much you can say that you're allowed to say. But fortunately, we do have some information on it. I mean, he confirmed that it was not a Motorstorm title, because I looked at the videos, and if you've never heard of Urban Smash or anything, it's like there are a couple of videos out there, pre-rendered footage of this game that looks to me like a combination of like Midtown Madness, if you ever played that, and Motorstorm. So like you're driving through urban environments, you're barreling through buildings and plate glass windows. There's all different kinds of vehicles. You could be in a bus, you could be in a ATV. I'm sure there probably would have been a Mini Cooper to do that, like Italian Job style of gameplay. And it looks almost like a mission-based arcade racer in the city is kind of the way I took it. Now, we don't know if that's really what it was, but it seems like that would have been the divergence from Motorstorm, to me anyway, instead of like just another Motorstorm in the city, which is basically what we got when Apocalypse came out. Yeah,
exactly, and I think the interesting thing about that discussion with Paul was hearing how Evolution did seem eager to kind of spread their wings past Motorstorm, despite how kind of prolific it was, because off the bat, Urban Smash sounds like it'd be perfect for a spin-off from the series as well. The small tech demo, it seemed as if they had almost like road rash type ideas as well in there.
Yeah, definitely road rashy. That was the other part to it, because it was combat oriented, but not in the way that you would, not purely cars just like hitting other cars, but also looked like there could have been like some on bike combat or something. And yeah, it looked interesting. It would have been opening for them to do something outside of MotorStorm that I honestly would have liked to see, because although I did enjoy MotorStorm, I feel like, unfortunately, with everything that happened to Apocalypse, I mean, you never would have known it going in that all the tragedy was going to unfold, and it was going to affect the success of that game in a very unexpected way. But I don't know. I think for me, MotorStorm, I had the most fun with Pacific Rift, and I was ready to move on from the series at that point.
Yeah.
So Urban Smash would have been a good way to do that. And I for a while I thought it was just like, what I knew about this game, I thought was just kind of the genesis of what would become Apocalypse. And I'm sure some of those ideas did translate, but I never knew it was supposed to be its own thing. It's very, very interesting. And Paul also talked about another unreleased game of Evolution Studios that they were working on, that was basically the B pitch for a PS4 title, where the A pitch was Drive Club. Yeah, and I'm really curious about that, and he couldn't talk about that at all.
I know.
Now, granted, I'm very happy we got Drive Club, so I think I actually don't miss whatever game that is, because I love Drive Club so much. But yeah, it's interesting how many different ways history could have gone, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And I said to Paul on the podcast as well, like, in terms of Drive Club's on-road versus MotorStorm's off-road, I personally am more of a fan of Evolution's on-road stuff. So I'm happy we ended up getting Drive Club as well. But it's always interesting when you hear about these concurrent projects, because it means at one point it wasn't even sure which game would see the light of day. And yeah, I mean, we do these episodes on Unreleased Racers, and ideally, in an ideal world, we'd be able to actually have episodes dedicated to, say, one of these potential games and have somebody talking about it, because there's probably so many interesting stories behind the scenes that they aren't allowed to talk about on the regular.
Yeah, definitely. And I think between the conversation that we had about Urban Smash, if you want to hear more about it, go listen to Paul talk about it in our previous episode.
Yeah, exactly.
There's really not much more we could say outside the videos. But I want to move on to the next game, because this is so interesting. This game we're about to talk about, Racer X for the Xbox, which was just a working title, is exactly what you described, where the story of this is unreal. Because so Racer X was this game that was developed by Boss Game Studios, which you may know from Top Gear Rally, World Driver Championship, and they made this snowboarding game on the N64 called Twisted Edge, which is amazing and totally overshadowed by 1080, but still very good. And they shut down in 2002, and this was the last game they were working on before they did get shut down. And this game is basically like it almost looks like a combination of PGR and Forza, because you have a lot of supercars from the day racing on public roads, but then there's also some racetracks, and then you also have some like prototypes and GT cars. So like it's almost like even further mixing those two. Like if you think PGR is like more arcade and Forza is more simulation, you know, PGR is more street racing, Forza is more real racing. This is like a combination of the two. And the reason why this is really interesting is because I think I unfortunately I couldn't I did not link the source in my note stock, but I found quotes from or comments from someone on the development team that pretty much confirmed that people who would end up working on Forza Motorsport 1 worked on this game, and it was basically done. They were very close to finishing this, and what essentially had happened was Boss, you know, talked to Microsoft and was like, you know, we think we can make you a racing game for your platform, and they did so. And then Microsoft kind of went ahead without Boss being fully aware of what was going on and made PGR. And PGR essentially got all of the Xbox's launch attention, because like this was going to be a launch game. And the studio lost funding, and then the game just like totally collapsed, even though it was mostly done, which is like really heartbreaking because like there's the videos and stuff of this game show something that's pretty finished, and the development team has actually talked at length about the stuff they were achieving. So yeah, it's totally crazy to me that like this could have been like a different Microsoft Racing franchise that just never materialized.
All the videos and information about this game makes it sound like it is pretty much like you're talking pushing the Xbox as far as it could go in terms of capabilities at the time it was being worked on.
Yeah, this was like going to be a launch title, and according to an interview with IGN, which I was reading, it was they were really trying to make it the Xbox's most advanced racer at a time that was very, either a launch title or very early in the system's lifespan. Was running at 60 frames, 25,000 polygons per car. They had all kinds of different effects as far as like leaves falling on the track and smoke and like. I mean, watching it now, it's hard to remember what was technically advanced for the Xbox at that time because everything kind of blends together. And PGR obviously was such a pretty game, but yeah, I just think it's amazing that this game was pretty much developed and the bones of it. I don't think anything got carried on to Forza Motorsport, but like the impetus behind it would eventually get carried on to Forza. I think is very interesting, and also like some of the cars in the game are strange because like I was talking about the fact that they're like prototypes, and so you got the Audi R8R, the Cadillac Northstar LMP, which is something that like is such a 2000s idea of like a Cadillac prototype. I mean, we have one now in IMSA in the US, but like this was the time when they were making stuff to take on Audi at Le Mans, which is like crazy. And the Bentley EXP Speed 8, which would end up winning Le Mans. So a couple of very unique prototypes of the day, and apparently it ran on the World Driver Championship engine, which you haven't really played many N64 games, so I don't know if you touched that one, but that was a pretty good Gran Turismo approximation for the N64.
Might be one to try out using totally legit methods. It's funny you mentioned Nintendo as well, because I see in the kind of notes written here that Boss actually ported it to GameCube as well.
Yeah, I think it was just like who can we sell this to? Like who can we get to go on with this project and salvage this? And again, I mean that's the last episode we had on Unreleased Racing Games. It went back to Nintendo every single time. It was just like all of these racing games that could have been on a Nintendo platform and never were. And this is another case so maybe where I mean they never like got. It's not like Nintendo ever approved it, I don't think there was any agreement. I think they were just trying to find a different place they could sell this game and push it. And it would have been great in the GameCube. The GameCube really could have used a game like this early on. Instead, all it got was all the Mona Lisa and R Racing Evolution, which were good, but by the time that those came out, it was too late. And they weren't amazing. They were just okay. So
yeah, exactly. It's just annoying because Nintendo have never actually. Like, throughout all these potential opportunities, they never decided to have a semi-realistic racing game, like, as part of their portfolio, and, I mean, I always just think, like, a fit like Auto Modelista would be perfect, like, just as a recurring franchise. It doesn't have to be incredibly realistic, but it can feature, like, real cars and real tracks, but obviously it's an area Nintendo feel as if they don't actually need to tread on, and I think now the time has passed where that would even be a consideration, because outside of Gran Turismo and Forza, it's very difficult for any racing game to find a worthwhile chunk of sales.
Yeah, and they do just fine without it. I mean, Mario Kart is like the best selling racing franchise ever, probably. So.
Yeah, exactly.
I think they do okay on their own, but yeah, this game really surprised me. Just like knowing how it played into the larger Xbox story, and I think maybe Microsoft was looking for a team to fill that racing game gap in the system's launch repertoire, and maybe they had chosen Boss, and then what ended up happening was they were able to buy Bazaar, and then that kind of turned everything around once they had that team, because the similarities between PGR and MSR are so close. You know, those games are so alike that I wonder if PGR was just a very quick reworking by Bizarre to get that game out the door, under Microsoft's direction, obviously, to get that game out the door so that the Xbox had a racing game, and once it did, you know, that was pretty much the death knell for Racer X.
Well, it's one of these things where you wonder if there is a playable build out there somewhere.
There might be
90% done. You've got to think
there is a playable build of this next game, which is also very interesting.
Go for it. Let's hear.
Because it's playable on a console that doesn't exist. So
nice.
You can, I guess, get an emulator and play it.
A what?
This is strange. So it's called IMSA Racing, or it's called World Championship Racing. I don't know which title was the prevailing one, but I think many people know that IMSA Racing. And yeah, so this was developed by 3DO, and it was intended for the M2. Now, do you know anything about the M2? Because I should have done more research on it, but only talking about it now do I realize I know nothing about this console. It was basically supposed to be the sequel or the successor to 3DO.
Yeah, I don't have a clue about it, man.
Yeah, so essentially the 3DO was this failed system that in the 32-bit days that nobody really liked, and then I guess for some reason they found a way to they found a logical reason to potentially make a successor to that platform, which, given the failure of the 3DO, I don't know why they would do that, but they did. But the thing is, I guess 3DO can push it on their own, so what they decided, because the whole idea with 3DO was that it was a technology designed by the 3DO company that was going to be licensed out to various tech companies. So you had, I think, Panasonic made one, and LG, which was Gold Star at the time, made one. So you had two different 3DOs that were running the same hardware, but they were made by two different manufacturers. It's almost like Android phones today would probably be a good way to think about it, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So, but what they did in this case was the first 3DO failed, so I guess they worked out a deal with Panasonic where Panasonic would manufacture the thing. So it was going to be the Panasonic M2. Known as the Matsushita M2 because Panasonic is they're owned by a company called Matsushita in Japan. But anyway, we're getting farther and farther away from racing games. The important thing is that this system never came out, but it was planned that it was going to launch with a racing game, and the racing game was going to be based on American sports car racing. That's what IMSA is. And it was first showed at E3 in 95. And it was in development for 2 years before a console was canceled in mid-97. And the way it was canceled, too, I was reading a bunch of these stories about, what happened kind of at the end of the M2. They were showing up to E3 towards the end there in, 96 or 97. They're just we don't even know if this thing's going to be a game console. We might, make it, they might use this technology for, ATMs or, medical imaging or something like that. Nobody knew. Because I guess they just didn't really want to be in the video games business, but they made this console anyway, and they had this team developing this game. And the interesting thing about it is the game was pretty much completed, and it's the only M2 game that was completed, and builds of it exist. So I think the M2 shares some sort of hardware with an arcade board that Konami used, and maybe a couple other companies. So maybe if there's an emulator for that arcade board, this might be playable in MAME or something. I don't know. I don't know how you play it, but it is a pretty realistic for the time looking IMSA based racing game, which is interesting because those are very, very rare American focused sports car racing games. I feel like there aren't many of them, so I appreciate that somebody tried to do this.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think nowadays as well, you're less likely to even see that happen because Forza seems to have a good relationship with some of the American sports car series. It's usually just DLC for that series. But back then, you're right, I didn't see many racing games based on this series at all, and I'm just having a quick glance at the Wikipedia page for the game, and it does actually sound pretty interesting, to be honest, and it was good somebody tried to give it a go at the very least, despite the fact it was on the M2. I'd be interested to see one of those in real life now.
Yeah, I mean, you had a couple, like, there was, Andretti Racing was a pretty famous game. It was on Saturn, it was on PlayStation. I think it got ported to 16-bit consoles as well, and that was notable because it had IndyCar racing, but it wasn't like, I don't think it was a full IndyCar license. It was just like you maybe had you had the car that whatever Andretti child was driving it. I know nothing about IndyCar. When we do our episode about Kart Flag to Flag, then we'll have an expert on the show. But I know nothing about that series. But yeah, it was like a combination of IndyCar and I guess car at the time and NASCAR. You had some stock cars. I don't know if there's a sports car in that game, but it was like kind of like the whole scope of American sports car racing. And there was that. There was actually, funnily enough, Paul mentioned it on the previous episode. He worked on as a QA tester for Codemasters IndyCar game.
Yep.
In the early 2000s, which I've never played. So there weren't a lot of American car racing games. And this one's interesting because, like, as I put down the notes, they were touting, they were very proud of the graphics engine they had at the time. The physics were based on hard driving, and they were proud of that too, which is kind of strange because, I mean, hard driving was like from the Virtua Racing days. Like, hard driving's really old, so I don't know how they were able to kind of take that very, sort of rudimentary early 3D racing game and make it into this, but like, because I don't know, like the footage of this looks pretty impressive for the time. Like, it's not quite Dreamcast level, but it looks nicer in the PlayStation 1, so.
Yeah, it looks fine. I think that's the way I'd describe it. It looks kind of what you would expect in terms of the lighting and stuff. It looks very much of that era, but that's not indicative of the game's quality. It could be fantastic. I've said I've got a scenario for you. So, say this game comes out, but it's on the Dreamcast somehow. And there's a chance it could be as good as Le Mans 24 Hour. But if you get it on the Dreamcast and it's that good, Le Mans 24 Hour doesn't see the light of day. What would you prefer?
Definitely Le Mans 24. I mean, like, it's, yeah, that game is the, I mean, it came out, so we know what it was, and it was perfect. I don't think that this would have been at that level.
Alright, sure, no worries. I was saying, if you could have this game or Le Mans 24 Hour, but not both, on the Dreamcast, what would you choose, assuming the gameplay quality is the same in both titles? Like, would you prefer an American sports car series, or? Personally,
I care more about the European stuff, but because of where I am and the way I was exposed to racing, like, I do kind of have a soft spot for this, because it's not an area that really gets a lot of love, I feel like, as far as, like, racing in the US. It's very much like NASCAR or open wheel racing, IndyCar, kart back in the day. Like, sports car racing never really, I feel like, found the footing here. So the idea of this is really cool, but oh well.
Yes, that's the perfect way to sum it up. And it is the case for all of these unreleased racing games, unfortunately. We can theorise about how good they could have been, but in terms of actual content out there, it's pretty light on the ground, and it's a bit of a shame, but at the same time, we had so many good racing games during these eras we're talking about that there was inevitably going to be some casualties along the way.
Yeah, and I mean, I just really, in the case of this last game, I just want to figure out a way to, like, maybe play it, because, like, the idea of emulating a console that doesn't exist is kind of cool to me.
That is, yeah. Very exciting.
I mean, it's different than emulating just Sega arcade boards, which is pretty much what I do now. I recently built a PC, and the first thing I did was make sure I could run Scud Race on it. So, not that it's hard to do, not that it's hard to do, but just because I was like, this needs to be the first game I play on this, and yeah, it was a tearful moment.
Just like mine's a Sega Rally Revo and Shocks.
Oh man, you don't need a computer to play Sega Rally Revo. Just, like, go get your 360 or your PS3 or something.
Yeah, but it's in 30 frames per second on the console, and I've never played it in 60. So.
Oh boy. All right.
That game will be part of our upcoming series. I won't spill the details yet, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do know what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, look, it was a good game. I just wish I could love it as much as you do.
Maybe though, like you were saying before, and this isn't, I'm not throwing some shade here, but you said you learned how to play Virtua Racing. What if you learned to play Sega Rally and Evo?
Yeah, you might. I mean, you might be right about that. Although, like, if I didn't learn how to play the game, I'm really impressed with the fact that I beat it, because it gets really hard at the end.
Oh,
like,
it does. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
getting
you probably
to
know.
yeah, well, getting through that game was that was a real achievement for me. And unlocking that unholy, weird, made up hatchback. Had some weird name. The Andorra Racer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but see,
ridiculous
surely
looking thing.
if you played through the whole game, then you must have enjoyed it. But that's a discussion for another day.
Sure. All right, so that brings us to the end of this episode of Time Extend. Thanks so much for listening. We've had a lot of awesome reactions and responses to our previous last couple episodes with Paul and with Jordan, and we thank you so much for letting us know what you think about the show, giving us feedback, commenting. We always appreciate that. You can do it on the SoundCloud, but we'll probably see it quicker. We'll definitely see it quicker on Twitter. So head to our Twitter or go to GT Planet, because we post those episodes on GT Planet, and go participate in the forums. And always love to see those comments. So thanks so much.
Yeah, definitely. And also the Twitter engagement recently has been fantastic. If you are somehow listening to this podcast and haven't seen our Twitter feed, we generally post some really obscure ads and commercials for old racing games, which is going down a treat, and there's also some other stuff on there, so if you're interested in that type of content, it's definitely something to check out.
Yeah, the Twitter is time_extend, and you'll notice it by all of the Wipeout, Gran Turismo, and Ridge Racer ads that are plastered on the photos section of the page, but yeah. So definitely go check that out, and thanks for listening again, and we'll see you soon.
See you next time, guys. Cheers.